You're listening to Tony Graham on Binjang 91.5, and it's time for Tech Talk with Matthew Dickerson. G'day, Matthew.
Yeah, good afternoon, Tony. Great to be chatting to you again.
Yes, and we've got some really interesting topics today, I have to say. This morning's session was pretty good, but I think the afternoon session is even more interesting. The first topic is about the global shortage of computer chips, which are in absolutely everything from phones to cars to you name it. So what is the one item where we will see the most delays? And plus, let's just explain what the computer chip is and where it goes and what it does.
So the old story, Tony, when people talk about computer chips or processors or CPU, central processing unit, they probably saw a picture somewhere of a circuit board and there was one chip in the middle of that circuit board and it was the brains that did everything, and then all the other components coming off that allowed you to connect various devices to it. The reality now is that we have not just a computer chip in one product, but so many different parts of just about every product that we use that's electronic have computer chips that control that one component. So, for example, in a computer, you might still have that CPU that runs the computer, but then you might have another processor that runs the modem on it, or another computer processor or a chip that runs the Wi-Fi, or one that runs the video card. So when we think of a computer chip, there are so many different computer chips that are used for so many different parts of the product that you might have. And the one area that really has probably seen a huge increase in computer chips and the consumption of computer chips are our cars. Cars in the old days where you had a good old-fashioned carby and a couple of cables that connected that carby and you opened up the float valve and you allowed things to happen there. All those mechanical processes, just about all those are now have been replaced by electronic processes, which means they've got computer chips. So electronic fuel injection, for example, how much fuel goes in, what's happening with the timing of that particular engine, all these various parts of a car are controlled by computer chips. And if you go to buy a new car now with just about all the modern brands that are using computer chips, you might have a delay, unless the car's sitting there on the floor, of about 6 months. So even though computer chips are causing some delays in TVs and gaming consoles and maybe even smartphones, cars, which seems incredible, but cars are the one area where we're seeing the largest delays or the longest delays. And they're calling this whole process Chipageddon, because it is a bit like an Armageddon with a coming together of a whole thing, a range of things. Record demand with COVID-related purchases from people. Then you've got around the world various things such as drought, fires, snowstorms. You've had a whole range of things that have happened, and there aren't a lot of manufacturers of the chips that are needed, in particular by car manufacturers around the world. So you don't need much of an interruption on the supply processes suddenly to have an impact on being able to buy a new car.
Yeah, and there's just so many chips in a car now. That's the other thing, the volume of chips in a car.
You're spot on. There's so many parts that I mentioned briefly, some of the parts of the engine, but think about in the console, the components in the dash, just about everything that's happening in that car has got some sort of microprocessor using a microprocessor for that function. You've got lane assist, you've got radar control, cruise control. You've got so many parts of it that are all controlled by these chips.
Yeah, well, the entertainment console, probably got, quite a few different chips in it.
Yeah.
There's so many different ones.
And I haven't actually been able to find out whether or not the ship, the Ever Given, that was stuck in the canal for a period of time, whether there were chips on some of those ships. I mean, they're talking about maybe a 2-week delay for that to get back to normal flow of ships going through. But there's quite a good possibility that some of those ships have got chips on them as well. Maybe chips are light enough that they fly them into places rather than put them on ships, but it wouldn't surprise me if some of those ships had some chips on them. You've got places like Ford in the US have said that their profits will be hit by up to US $2.5 billion this year. Nissan is actually cutting back output at their plants. Very frustrating, you can imagine. You've got all these cars being produced, but they just can't be used because they haven't got chips in them. GM have talked about $2 billion profit hit. Volkswagen has sent home 10,000 factory workers because there just isn't the work for them.
Yeah, it's quite dire. Yeah. Now, the VW Combi is making a comeback. So what's different about the new version, Matthew?
Well, look, I used to love the old VW Combi, and my brother actually had one of the beautiful yellow. I'm not sure if yellow is the right description of the colour. It was kind of an off yellow. So he had one of those ones. He ended up destroying it because he rolled it down a hill one time, and I don't know they were the safest things to drive around. But they've got a new VW Combi. They haven't made the VW Combi since about 1980, so it's been about 40 years since they've made them. But they've got a new one coming out, which will be, I think, much better for a couple of reasons than the old Combis. They're making it electric, so for a start they can make it a bit safer. They were a bit top-heavy, the old one, so it was a bit easier to roll those, as my brother found out. But when they put the electric batteries down on the base, which is where all electric vehicles put their batteries, the centre of gravity is much lower, so suddenly it's much safer. They've got a little bit of room between where your legs sit and the front of the car now. So in the old days, the old Combi, I wouldn't like to have been in a head-on collision in one of the old ones because there wasn't much room between where your legs sat and the front of the car. But they've made them a bit safer now so they can handle that head-on collision. And basically they've modified it and made it a more modern version, but it's still that old classic Combi. So I think they're on a bit of a winner here. And VW, certainly the future for VW, they have said the way to get past Dieselgate is to have an electric future and really put their whole company, they're banking their whole company on the electric future. So they've come out with these basically ID3, ID4, ID5, the basic drivetrain and the base of the vehicle is the same for a whole range of different models, and then they just put a different top on the different one. So I think VW's future is really around electric vehicles and things like the old classic Combi in electric version. What a great combination of old and new.
Very good for those people interested in combis. Now, Apple AirPower, there was a dream about Apple AirPower, but what's going on with that? And besides that, what is Apple AirPower?
Apple came out with an announcement at one of their launches a couple of years ago where they had this idea with this pad. They had it at the launch, obviously showing off a dummy version they'd made up there, a pad at the launch where it was wireless charging. You could charge 3 devices at the same time and you could just sit them anywhere on there. Fantastic. But it kept getting delayed and people were wondering when this new AirPower charging pad was going to come out. In the end, very quietly, Apple just shelved it because they just couldn't get it working. Since then, a couple of other companies have got to the stage where they've got it working, and Xiaomi's the latest one to bring an AirPower equivalent out. They've got 19 coils throughout this pad, so it means that you can sit a device, a wireless charging compatible device, basically anywhere on that charging pad, and it will charge those devices if they're compatible with them in terms of the 20-watt charging, will charge them up to 20 watts. It'll charge slower if it's one of the older devices that doesn't charge up to 20 watts, but basically you can charge at 20 watts, which is a pretty impressive charging speed on this pad that you can just sit at absolutely anywhere. And this is kind of the future we're going towards here, Tony. Imagine having, for example, a desk built into a desk, a device like this, so you just come in, set your phone on your desk, do some work, and automatically it starts charging at a good speed. As I say, 20 watts is a good charging speed. So this is something that I think just the convenience factor. Xiaomi's also coming up with different charging devices and different charging phones where they've got the ability for a single charger and a single phone to be charged at 50 watts, and then recently they just announced a new phone that will go as high as 67 watts in wireless charging. So it makes it very quick to charge those devices.
Yeah, now for the benefit of the listeners there, now Xiaomi, I think that's a Chinese company, isn't it? And of course, there are lots of concerns about a Chinese company. China has been declared an unreliable trading partner. So that goes not just with supply, but also goes with exports as well. So is it or isn't it?
Yeah, so Xiaomi, it's spelled Xiaomi, a Chinese company, definitely. They haven't got the same reputation, say, for example, as Huawei, but certainly people have question marks over Chinese-based companies. And you're right, again, they're still innovating, they're still coming up with devices. There isn't the ban from the US Department of Commerce on Xiaomi like there is on Huawei, but that can always change in a heartbeat. So stay tuned, I suppose.
Yeah, and guess what, Matthew? It's less than one day to go to April Fool's Day. I'm getting excited, I have to say.
Yeah, what have we got planned in the technology world for April Fool's Day? Who knows what announcements might come? They might come up with announcements about cars that can drive themselves, for example. Who would think about that as an April Fool's Day joke?
I can just right now think of better things than that.
The trick with April Fool's Day jokes, of course, Tony, is making it so close to believable that it's believable, but just a
Yes.
little bit of a stretch too far.
Yes, that's usually the clue. But I think we've got some certainties happening tomorrow, which are very interesting, and that's what I'm excited about.
Excellent.
Anyway,
Excellent.
yeah. Now, you've been listening to Tech Talk with Matthew Dickinson on Binjane 91.5. So stick around for next week's show every Tuesday in the morning and in the afternoon. And now it's back to the great music and all the information on our great station, Binjane 91.5.
Thanks, Tony. Talk to you next week.